So I knew that was not going to end well. And I remember telling my daughter, my younger daughter at the time, I said, this is not going to end well. I said, there's going to be a killing. I don't know what made me say that. I don't know why I said that, but I said that. And I said it not once, but multiple times. And at that time, I did not know that Jarrett had bought a gun a couple months prior. So I find it ironic that I said that, not knowing what was coming, right? So, anyway, picking up where I left off in part two, I I talked to him on his birthday and he said it's just a normal day. And I said, "Well, did y'all do anything? Did you go anywhere?" And he said no. And he asked me if I could send him some money, $50. He didn't say for what. And I said, sure. So I ended up giving him a $20 gift card to Starbucks. And then I sent him the $50 on Cash App. And he said, "Oh my God, Mom, thank you so much. I'm so grateful." And then in mid March, I received a phone call from him, and he was so sweet. And he said, "Hey, Mom." I said, "Hey, bud, what's up?" And he said, uh, "I'm just calling to get some advice." And I don't know if you have grown children, but when your kids call you or ask you for advice, that's a really big deal. If they're coming to you for advice as adults, that is such a compliment, right? So I said, "Sure, bud. What's going on?" And he said, "Well, I don't really know what to do. I can't find a job." And he said, "I never thought it would be this hard to get a job." And I said, "I know, right? There's a lot of competition out here." And I said, especially when you're in a bigger city like Atlanta, there's a lot more candidates to choose from. So it is actually harder to find a job in a big city versus a smaller town. And I said, "Where are you? What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm at the apartment. I'm just walking around outside." And I said, "Okay." I said, is he still saying mean things to you?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Like what?" And he would never tell me. I don't know if he didn't want to hurt me or if it hurt him to repeat what was actually said to him. And that really breaks my heart as a mother. You know, you never want your kids to be bullied or be talked down to in any way. But he said, "Oh, it's nothing." And I said, "Okay." I didn't pressure him to tell me, but I knew it had to be pretty bad for him to not want to tell me. So I told him that he needed to come back here to our hometown and that he needed to start over yet again. And I said, "You're still young. It's not too late." I said, "You got all the time in the world to decide what you want to do." And I said, "Do you have an idea of what you want to do?" And he said, "Yeah, I want to go back to school." And I said, "Oh, great." I said, "What do you want to major in?" He said, "Business administration." I was like, "Man, that is awesome." I said, "You can always find a job with that. And I think that's awesome." I said, "Well, why don't you come back down here and just start over again?" I said, "You can live back with my mom." And I said, "You don't have to pay for nothing and you can start over." And one of the last things he said to me was, "Mom, I gotta go," just like that. And I said, "Okay, is everything okay?" And he said, "Yeah, I'll talk to you later. Bye." And then a few weeks after that, he texted me a couple more times. And one of his last texts was, "I just feel bad all the time." And I want to emphasize that text because now looking back, that text was so critical. It was a cry for help. but I did not know it at the time. It was a pain text, but I just thought, oh, he's just sad. He's just in a bad place, but he'll be all right. He'll figure it out like we all do, and he'll be okay. But he wasn't. And he didn't figure it out. A couple more texts later, I said, you matter. I said, you're not who Dad says you are. You're who God says you are. And I said, I love you. And he said, thank you, Mom. On April the 2nd, I said, hey, you doing okay, bud? How are you? I haven't heard from you in a little bit. And then on April the 8th of 2025, he ended his life. My ex-husband had tried to call him the whole day from work. He didn't answer. And that was very unlike him. And my ex-husband called my mother and said, hey, did Jarrett move back in with you, by the way? And she said, no, I haven't heard from him. I haven't been able to get a hold of him. And so my ex-husband got back to the apartment around 7:30. He walked in the door of the apartment and the bathroom door was closed. He opened it. The shower curtain was closed. He opened it, and in the bathtub was my son, slumped over with a gunshot wound to the right side of his head. The gun was found on his lap. The gun case was on the counter. He left no note, no reason. And I'm telling you, as a mother, that has been the hardest part for me, is why? Not knowing. What were his last thoughts? What were his final moments like? Was he okay? Was he relieved to get out of here? Was he crying? Was he angry? Was he just numb? Did he cry out to Jesus? Or did he just say, F it, I'll never know. We'll never know. But I can tell you that my son is happy now. He is at peace now. He is free now. And he is still with me even now.